All these trees right here were here. They just weren't as big. This tree.
Hey, Daryl.
Hey, Joel. I'm just sitting at your gate, brother.
Yeah, right on. I'll come out and open her up for you.
Okay. Thanks, Joel.
Yes, sir.
Bye.
The story of what happened to Dolores Wulff in July 1979 begins at the last place she was seen, her home. There, the best parts of Dolores' personality shine through, and the worst traits of her husband Carl became exposed. But what really happened inside those walls? What was the family dynamic like, especially in the years, months, and weeks leading up to the night of July 31st? We went to Woodland to find out. I'm Adam Rittenberg.
And I'm Kyle Bonagura. This is The Unforgotten, Season 3, Finding Dolores Wulff. Episode 3, This Way to the Murderer's House.
It's early March of 2025, and Kyle and I are at the gate of the house on Hillcrest Drive in Woodland, where Dolores Wulff lived with her husband Carl and where they raised their 4 children. The single-story ranch-style home had beige and brown paneling and a black roof. The large yard backs up to eucalyptus trees. This is where Dolores was last seen alive on the night of July 31st, 1979. To understand the significance of this house, we turn to someone who knew it well. Our guide is a man named Daryl Erzman. Daryl grew up a few houses down from the Wulffs and became good friends with Paul Wulff and the family. He still lives in the area. We met Daryl in the parking lot of a local grocery store, hopped in his dark gray truck, and got rolling. Daryl is a talker and seems to know everyone in the area. He had a fascinating career as a corrections officer, including 23 years at San Quentin, where he spent time overseeing one of the death row units. He even served last meals to several of the condemned before execution. Daryl was the perfect person to take us around. He made contact with Joel Burton, who owns the old Wulff family home. Joel agreed to let us check out the property.
Joel, how you doing, sir? Hey, appreciate this, man.
We meet Joel, a tall man with a beard, who wore a trucker hat with a duck on it. He is a contractor and looked the part. A pencil in his ear, a tape measure clipped to his pocket. As we make our way towards the house, Daryl mentions that we had been on the property before. When driving around in 2020, we showed up unannounced, and Joel's wife, after initially being startled, was nice enough to let us look around. That day, we didn't go inside the house, but saw a slab of concrete with small handprints in them. It had a date, 8/10/72, and initials, TW for Tom Wulff and PW for Paul Wulff. Joel had the slab removed and sent to Tom as a gift. To give you a sense of how close-knit Woodland is, Joel revealed his aunt as a woman named Donna Shira, who became a surrogate mother to Tom after Dolores disappeared. Donna even took Tom into her home.
Oh, are you kidding me?
Yeah, that's my aunt. Yeah.
Oh, it goes deep. Because Tom and the Shearers are basically a second family.
Yeah. They
Yeah.
really rallied up around Tom because she's at that age where that caused some deep wounds. And I remember my Aunt Donna telling me a story when Tom had some stuff in the house still. And at the time, Tom was living with Donna. So Donna came, not Tom, to come get some of Tom's stuff out of the house and met the dad. And she said as soon as he walked up to the door, she just felt like this huge burst of darkness, like the whole house was glooming with darkness.
Oh, yeah.
And as a man of faith, I get there's a darkness to this world we live in when that man was living in it, for sure.
Joel and his family are several owners removed from Carl and Dolores. As we entered through the back, Daryl noted that he hadn't been inside the home since wandering over in early August 1979 to find out what had happened to the woman he called Mrs. Wulff.
Wow, it looks so small now. As a kid. Yeah, this room was Anna's. So I'm trying to get it. Something's a little different in here.
The door here.
Yeah, and that was Paul's, Tommy, and then their mom and dad's room was right here.
Joel had done significant renovations to the house, and much of it looked different from what Daryl remembered. A sign above the living room read, "You can spot a dad by their courageous heart and a love that lasts. Clearly, there was a different vibe in the home than when Carl Wulff lived there. Daryl was constantly around back then, playing sports with the Wulff boys and regularly tagging along to family outings. Daryl truly loved Dolores, who would always welcome him into their home. He essentially became the fifth Wulff sibling.
She would always have food. So one day we got there and we opened up the front door from school and we're like, oh man, the whole house smells awesome. We're like, well, she's not here. So we went in and we looked in the double oven. There was a chicken up top and a chicken down below. Paul goes, well, excellent. One's for you, one's for me. So man, we just finished them chickens off, right? And she came home. She walked in. We're sitting at the dinner table eating that chicken. And she goes, what are you guys doing? And then she just shook her head and goes, I'll be back. I'm going to the store. They were having company that night.
Carl certainly wouldn't have had the same reaction to the chicken incident. Daryl remembered him as a menacing presence, the type of guy who would make all the boys scatter if they were playing outside when he came home. Carl would acknowledge Daryl, but didn't say much to him, other than to tell him that he talked a lot, which of course he did. Daryl had seen Carl's temper firsthand, especially when he took it out on Tom. While Dolores did her best to protect Paul, Tom bore the brunt of the abuse.
I watched Mr. Wulff beat him up. I still get emotional when I think about that. He tore Tommy, Adam, everybody took the brunt. Paul couldn't have taken the brunt. Mrs. Wulff would. There's no way. It wasn't that Mrs. Wulff was not looking out for Tommy. It was just he knew how to do it and when to do it.
Carl's drinking also wasn't a secret for Daryl. Standing in the kitchen of the old Wulff home with us in March, he pointed to a corner cabinet where Carl would keep his best liquor, and recounted a scene he saw many times as a boy.
I would watch him come home. He'd do it every day, and he'd open that up, and he'd pull out a bottle. I didn't know what it was, and it was Bombay Sapphire. I don't know if you've ever seen the color of a Bombay Sapphire. It's that really pretty blue.
Daryl's parents didn't drink, and he couldn't take his eyes off of Carl.
He would pour that Bombay Sapphire, and he'd swirl it. Same thing every day. It was a ritual. And then he would drink it and he'd go, ah. And I used to tell myself, that's got to be some good stuff.
After touring the old Wulff family property, Daryl drove us around Hillcrest Drive, a mile-long, U-shaped stretch that feels remote. Daryl tells us that the community generally looks similar to when he was a kid, but the trees have grown, and each 5-acre lot is more cordoned off than it used to be, because the homeowners association prevented individuals from building big fences. This is notable because neighbors could see each other's properties. And as Daryl showed us around, we learned this wasn't just any neighborhood. It was a place with a deep undercurrent of power and authority.
He was the deputy sheriff of Woodland.
In fact, he was a deputy sheriff?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This guy was a deputy sheriff too. Ron Rumsey and Mr. Murphy right here.
That's wild. So they had to have known Carl.
Yes, they did know Carl, but they weren't like investigators. They're just patrol guys. And the first one I told you, he actually ran for sheriff, Ron Rumsey of Yolo County. And then directly across the street from Paul's right there was Mr. Bigelow, and he was a CHP, High Patrol.
Daryl explained that all of these law enforcement neighbors wouldn't have been looking into Dolores's case, but Kyle and I still thought it was brazen for Carl to have possibly committed a violent crime just yards from where some police lived. Daryl didn't realize anything was wrong until a few days after Dolores went missing, even when more people started showing up to the Wulff home. He made his way over, just like he always did, and was stopped by Mary Thomas, one of Dolores's cousins.
I'm thinking, man, what are all the cars doing here? They didn't tell me there was a party or somebody's birthday. And I come up and one of the relatives, I think it was Mary, came out and said, Daryl, come here. And I said, what? I want to get something to eat. And she said, you need to leave. And I said, I need to leave? Because, I was part of the family. And she said, something's happened and we'll get a hold of you and let you know a little bit later. I was devastated. I didn't know what was going on.
Daryl's life changed the night Dolores went missing. He no longer could walk down from his house to hang at the Wulff's, where he shot hoops, sorted through Paul's sport card collection, and ate Dolores's food. In the weeks that followed, as the investigation took shape, the neighborhood transformed into something much more ominous. As Detective Ron Heileman began investigating, with all suspicions pointing to Carl Wulff, he set up a makeshift command post outside Daryl's home, which is on a little hill overlooking the Wulff home. Heileman and Daryl's parents were close, And Daryl's best friend to this day is Heileman's son, Kevin.
Ron used to sit in the driveway back when you could see when there's no trees. And so he would watch the house all the time and see the antics that went on.
I did that several times in the beginning because I just didn't know what his mindset was, you know. There were some evenings that I would just go do that. You know, sometimes you get lucky, but that didn't happen.
Ron Heileman went the extra mile to try and solve the Dolores Wulff case. A group of Dolores' relatives, though, went even further. After the break, Kyle will tell you about their mission to start getting answers from Carl.
We didn't want peace. We wanted revenge.
Several weeks after Dolores went missing, her son Tom played in a high school football game. In a town like Woodland, those games became community events, and many in the Rocha family went to watch. Tom had told his father he wanted nothing to do with them, but Carl showed up anyway. He had been laying low since his wife's disappearance, which was the talk of the town. Many people knew he had been questioned by police and was seen as a prime suspect. But he was still there to watch Tom, which meant he had to face his wife's relatives. Here's Dolores' cousin, Tony.
We were kind of headhunting him, and we waited for him to come up out of the crowd, and we were standing there, and he took off running back down the stairs into the crowd. And at that point, we knew he did it. The whole community knew he did it. The assault on Carl Wulff pretty much started that day.
The period after Dolores disappeared included an investigation by local law enforcement, just like any other missing persons case. But what made this different is that Dolores' family became directly involved in mind-blowing ways. Maybe they felt a sense of guilt for not really thinking Carl would follow through on his threats. And they certainly lost patience with the authorities, other than Ron Heileman. The Roaches just weren't the type to wait around for justice. They were the type to take matters into their own hands. Carl Wulff might have technically been free, but he soon became a prisoner in his own home, and in the town of Woodland. Matt Rocha Jr., Slick's son and Dolores' nephew, remembers several family members gathered at his house, plotting how to deal with Carl.
One night, it was my uncle, my dad, and some of the older cousins, and they discussed ways of how could we kill him and get away with it. And I remember at 16 thinking, we're going to be the first suspects. They're not going to think anything else. And they had decided that it wouldn't be worth it because then my dad or somebody else would be going to jail and it wouldn't make the situation any better. But my older cousins were always screwing with Wulff.
The group that would turn up the heat on Carl consisted of a group of cousins. Tony Rocha, his sister Mary Thomas, Debbie Baker and her older brother, who's also named Tony, and a few others. Although Dolores' brothers knew about what was happening, as did her older children, this group of relatives mostly acted on its own.
Everything we could do to make his life horrible, we were doing it. And it was kind of a family-run thing, you know. The whole family was involved. You know, like you say, next to killing him, well, the only thing we could do is harass him.
The Roaches were on call to make Carl's life miserable. They followed him around town and leaned on friends in the community to be tipped off whenever Carl was spotted publicly.
I chased him out of several grocery stores where he had carts full of food, waiting in line, and we'd go, "Hey, Wulff!" And he would just run out of the store and leave his groceries right in the cart right there. One day he was paying, and he started to get his wallet out, and me and my nephew Tony in Safeway, we come up behind him, we go, "Carl!" And he looks at us and he just runs out the door. Doesn't pay for his groceries or nothing.
Carl stayed involved with the Woodland Chamber of Commerce even after Dolores disappeared. When the chamber honored Woodland High's longtime principal in the fall of 1981, who, if you remember, Dolores served as the secretary for, Carl showed up with a woman he was dating. Tony heard about it and rushed over with his cousin, Tony Baker.
So we got there, and there's these two big open double doors that you could walk into where the podium is facing right at you. And Wulff was sitting like 2 seats over from the principal. And me and Tony went in and we slammed those doors open against the wall. Boom! We go, "Wulff!" And he jumped up right in front of the Chamber of Commerce and all those people, and he made a run for the door. We're running around the crowd trying to head off, and we catch him just as he's getting in his car. And he's sitting there, and his girlfriend was with him. She comes running out, and it was in the fall or the winter. It was cold out. And she says, open the door. It's freezing out here. And he's saying, those guys will kill me. You don't understand. They'll drag me out of the car and kill me right here in the parking lot.
The Roaches were relentless, not only following Carl around Woodland, but making sure he felt their presence at home. They posted signs along the road leading to his house, marking the distance to what they called the murderer's house. It was a public act of defiance, and an unsettling reminder of just how far they were willing to go. Here's Debbie Baker again.
We were all sitting at the table, and we were making signs, and my mom worked at the hospital, and she worked until about 10 o'clock at night. So she walks in the house, and she sees us all sitting at the table, and she thought maybe we were helping my younger brother do something for school. Well, she comes in, and there's these signs, and they're saying, follow arrows to Killer Wulff's house. She just kind of shook her head and like, oh, you guys.
Debbie's mom might not have been amused by what Debbie and the others were up to, but she soon saw that their strategy worked.
A couple days later, my mom is sitting in the cafeteria at the hospital, and there's some people at a table next to her, and they're talking about, did you see those signs on 24? There's a bunch of signs saying to go to Killer Wulff and follow the signs and everything. And my mom goes, I just sat there shaking my head and thinking, yes, I saw them. They were being made on my dining room table.
Carl once drove around for several days with a sign on his car that read, I murdered my wife. It was placed there by Debbie's sister, Kathy. The cousins also painted Killer Wulff across Carl's driveway in red paint. Those signs were more than just words. They were a signal to the whole town that the Roaches weren't backing down. Here's Matt Rocha Jr. again.
When he'd try to show up at sporting events, they'd pop his tires. They'd write stuff on his house in blood. After they'd slaughtered animals, they did movie-type stuff to screw with them.
As you can hear, the Roaches pushed the line of simple intimidation. They were unabashed, especially around Carl's house. They left a pig's head and fish entrails on the property, and that wasn't even the most disgusting thing they did. When Tony Baker was growing up, he slept in his home's attic, and instead of going to the bathroom downstairs, he used a jar to relieve himself. And what's worse is he never dumped it out.
And he did that all through high school. And then he joined the Navy. And he was gone for 9 years. And that jar was still up there. And it used to get real hot up there. And it was full. And it was very dark, if I remember right. It's been there 9 years plus the 4 years of high school. So 13 years. Well, they decided to give it to Wulff.
And by give it to Wulff, she meant throw the jar through one of his windows where it crashed and spilled all over his living room carpet. Carl's neighbors became part of the antics, whether they wanted to or not. There was Hamp Shorty Hobbs, a Texas native who lived one lot over from Carl.
He was a hot-headed guy, hated Carl Wulff. He knew what he did. They would let us at their house, and we would go out into the field between their house, and we would throw dirt clods on Carl's house all night. And then he would come out with a gun, and then we'd hit him with a spotlight and throw rocks at him.
One time, Tony went to Carl's property with his nephew, Larry Baker. Their plan was to cut off the power to his house. But after they did it, they noticed Carl's neighbors sitting in chairs on their driveway with a view of the whole scene.
We did our deed in his power box, and I turned around and go, oh, fuck, they're looking right at us. So I go, Larry, just turn around and stare at them. We just turned around and glared at them. Those people picked up their lawn chairs, ran in their garage, put the door down. They weren't about to talk because they were like, we don't want this reign of terror brought down on us.
Initially, the family was willing to wait on local law enforcement and the local legal authorities to take action. But as the weeks and months went by, their patience wore thin. especially for Dolores' younger cousins. Tensions were rising, and before long, the Roaches clashed with the official investigation. Mary Thomas came up with a plan to call Carl, pretending to be from the sheriff's office. They would tell him that they had found a body, hoping that would lure him to where she was. They called him from a store several minutes from Carl's home, while keeping eyes on the house. And sure enough, Carl started loading things in the trunk of his car. But rather than wait for him to leave, Mary confronted Carl.
She was so emotionally tied into the case. She got so mad, and she drove up in his driveway and started yelling at him. And when I got back around the corner, Wulff was pointing a rifle at her about 20 feet away. So I jump out of my car, and I have a 12 gauge in my car. I jump out with my double barrel, and I said, dude, I'll cut you in half. It'll be the end of your days. He threw the gun back in the trunk and went in the house and told us we were crazy.
After Carl went back inside, the cousins went to the home of Frank Rocha, Dolores' brother, who lived nearby.
At this point, we're saying, you know what? I think we got him stirred up. And we're in a house, and we see Wulff going by. And I'm talking, that car was whistling, had to be going 100 miles an hour. So we're calling, they were calling Ron. Mary was calling Ron Heileman. We're calling everybody to get cars out there to follow him, because we're thinking at least we can get a direction, right?
But Detective Heileman wasn't pleased with what the Roaches had done.
Oh, man, did I get hot, because my plan was similar type situation.
Even though the family's effort had complicated things, Ron wasn't ready to abandon his own ruse.
We had set up a plan where we had a couple of officers and sometimes just one officer. We had about 5 or 6 vehicles stationed within a mile of his house on different roads. And we had an aircraft standing by. Me and another officer was at the airport. We had it set up. One of the deputy DAs phoned him to tell him that, there had been a body found and there was some evidence possibly found, and they acted like a newspaper person. And they had this machine making a noise like some newspaper.
Carl eventually headed into town. He went to the post office, with the police following behind. Then he went to the liquor store, bought a few bottles, and returned home.
We sat on that thing for several hours, and I said, he's not going anywhere. He knows that the family, for what they did, he wasn't going to take a chance.
Ron let the other deputies go home.
I stayed there till way after dark, and he didn't go anywhere again.
At this point, Rick Gilbert, the Yolo County DA, wasn't confident all their circumstantial evidence was enough to convict Carl of murder. So the ruse became a last-ditch effort to try to locate Dolores' body.
I was very involved in that. By that time, it didn't look like we were going to, quote, find the body. And so the thought was, let's do some somewhat extreme measures and see if we can do 2 things. One, potentially find the body, and in the course of doing that, establish whether evidence that Carl Wulff did it, if he goes to the body.
But after the plan failed, the official investigation essentially fizzled out. There would be no new leads and no new evidence. The harassment from the Roaches would go on for years, and later Carl Wulff claimed he called the police more than 100 times for protection from Dolores' family. Those calls mostly fell on deaf ears because law enforcement in Woodland and Yolo County believed he murdered his wife. Matt Rocha Jr. said the family even received some stunning advice from a member of the sheriff's department.
I'll never forget him saying that if he comes to our house and confronts us and we shoot him, to make sure we drag him inside and shoot him again in the house a couple times.
In other words, he was recommending they stage the scene because it's easier to claim self-defense if a shooting happens inside the home, not outside. It's a legal concept often referred to as the castle doctrine.
This is the sheriff's department, and I'm 16, hearing these stories and going out on digs with the shovel, thinking about it now, it's horrendous. But growing up on a farm, we just did what we had to do. Thinking about it now, I can't imagine having to tell my kids you have to do this stuff or hear these stories that I heard.
As the Roaches waged their personal war on Carl, they also launched increasingly desperate efforts to find Dolores, including turning to psychics. That's after the break.
The day after Dolores went missing, her sister-in-law Janet received a recommendation from her sister about a psychic who lived nearby in Davis. Maybe this woman could help. Janet told her husband Slick about the psychic, but he was apprehensive.
Well, I was always told not to believe in psychics growing up, but she got the phone number, started to call them, and I said, well, don't just say she's missing. See what she says.
I just called her and I said, can you tell me about my sister-in-law, Dolores? Nothing else. And she was silent for a moment, and then she said, one thing is she's kind of upset. She's trying to talk to her brothers, but they don't answer her. And then this big silence, and she said, she's dead. Her husband killed her. I'm not kidding. This was hot summer July. I got so cold I had the shivers. When she said that, I knew she was right.
I thought, whoa, maybe we had to go talk to this lady, which we did.
When Slick and Janet went to go meet with her, she asked Slick for a question that only he and Dolores would know the answer to. His mind took him back to childhood, when his older sister would read him Donald Duck comic books.
I said, yeah, ask my sister what Donald Duck's uncle used to eat for breakfast. And here it comes, Caledonian chickadees. Well, how in the hell would that lady know that? This lady's the real deal. There's no way you could lucky guess that one.
This psychic turned out to be the first of several who became involved in the search for Dolores. The Roaches brought in psychics from all parts of the country in the years that followed, hoping to get a clue on where Dolores could be. Here's Dolores' son Paul again.
They flew in some psychic from Boston, Massachusetts that had uncovered some remains, some other people that they had heard about. But they probably brought in 3 to 4 different psychics throughout the United States to try to help locate. It just seemed like there was never a day go by where they weren't actively planning, physically trying to do something in regards to find her.
Dolores' family was desperate, and they didn't see a significant downside to using psychics. Most did not charge much money, and the family used their feedback to determine where to dig. One psychic said Dolores was near stagnant water, which prompted her family to go to the property on Hillcrest Drive and drain the septic tank. But some of the experiences with psychics turned bizarre. One held a seance with Dolores' family members sitting in a circle and said Dolores' spirit was speaking through her own body. Mary Thomas told the Sacramento Bee in 1985 that the family never felt the psychics were doing a sham on them, that they had nothing to lose. According to Mary, the family spent $3,000 to $5,000 on psychics, with the highest cost coming from bringing them to Woodland. She said some psychics were very accurate in identifying elements of Carl Wulff's life, background, and behavior. We wanted to find Dolores, Mary told the Bee. I would probably do it again. I think anybody would. So Kyle, the psychics thing, I know we talked about this a lot. It just didn't seem to fit with the rest of this family, who they were, I think their philosophies, where they live. There's just all sorts of layers that don't seem to line up with psychics. But the psychics were a huge, huge part of the story. What did you think when you found out more and heard from more of the relatives just about how far they went to involve psychics and rely on psychics to try to find Dolores?
Yeah, so I think it speaks to a level of desperation, right? If you have nowhere else to turn, where do you go? You're trying to make sense of something that can't be explained. I guess you turn to the supernatural, and that's what happened here. Beyond that, it's interesting to hear that it wasn't just the family that used psychics and relied on psychics to go try to dig in these vast agricultural regions around Woodland. We later find out that there were psychics that popped up at various points of this story involving several different groups of people. And so the more I think about it, the more I'm come to the conclusion that it was just a sign of the times, that it was an accepted part of society in the late 70s, early 80s, that this is something that people were willing to believe in. And there is still some of that today, right? You kind of hear these stories on occasion, but that it was so ingrained into the story, kind of from start to finish, is pretty revealing about that era.
Yeah, I thought about the time and the place. And, both of us grew up in California. You still live there now. And I thought about California in the late 70s and early 80s. This was very much in line with the New Age movement. Nancy Reagan, the former First Lady, famously consulted an astrologist after there was an assassination attempt on her husband, obviously President Ronald Reagan, in 1981. So this is California at that time. And I think, again, it was a much more accepted thing, even though it sounds wild and out there, and certainly the chances of any of this leading them to Dolores, it didn't seem to increase those chances. But was there any value in this, or was this just more, pointing to the desperation overall that the family was essentially just willing to try anything they could at that point?
I think what's important to understand is it didn't hurt anything, right? There was no real way to decide where to dig or where to search. So if you're getting it from a psychic or you're getting it from someone else who theorizes about where to dig based on their own premonitions or theories, it wasn't really going to make a difference either way. And so it almost feels like a way that the family coped with everything, in that, hey, we need to be doing something. There needs to be some action on our behalf to help find Dolores. And if that helped them feel good about their own action in trying to help find Dolores, then I guess it's fine. Maybe there's a calmness that it provided them, knowing that they were doing everything they could to help find her.
Not surprisingly, the tips from the psychics didn't help. Here's Tony.
The professional psychics got us nowhere. We met a lady who called us. Just out of goodness of her heart, she didn't want a dime. She wouldn't even let us buy her dinner. And she's a little lady in Auburn, California, and she was 78 or 79 years old. And she said, I've heard about your case, but I had a dream last night. And if there's anything I can do, I would gladly come and help you guys. I don't want no money. I don't want nothing. She goes, I'm 78. If you guys want to come and get me, I will gladly go out with you and scour the area, which was amazing.
Tony and Mary drove out to Auburn, about 50 miles away, and picked up the woman. When they arrived, she showed them a letter and asked if they recognized the handwriting.
And we go, well, I don't understand the writing. It's a different language. And so the first thing she says is, can I see your mom? Is it all right to go by your parents? We go, yeah, you can go by that. So we go by and we introduce her to my mom. And first thing she says to my mom is, she says, do you have any letters that your sister, Dolores' mom, ever wrote? So my mom got one of those letters out. And it was an exact match of the letter the psychic lady had. We were like, man, we had chill city. We were like, whoa, what's going on here? We said, where'd you get this? And she said, I had an intervention thing where the spirit goes into your body, and wrote this message. And it gave us several tips about looking for water, number one. She was in water.
These psychics weren't actually clairvoyant, obviously. But there is real science to it. Psychics often take advantage of how the brain works. One trick they use is called subjective validation. It's when people believe something is true just because it feels personal or seems believable. The psychics in this story gave surprisingly specific details, but that's part of the act. People who are desperate for answers are much more likely to believe what they hear. Psychologists call this selective memory, when people remember only the details that seem to confirm what they want to believe. In this case, this probably means that there was more to those interactions with the psychics than what came to mind 45 years later. As a police detective, Ron Heilemann didn't think they were going to be of much help. But to appease the family, he was willing to talk with the psychics and, sometimes, accompany the family to digs based on the tips that had been conjured up.
First couple of times, there was a couple of them that seemed like they were pretty intelligent when I talked to them on the phone, and the family would go out and they'd find places that these people would be telling them about the way things looked. And they'd go out there and they'd want to start digging and stuff all around.
But after a while, Heilman was only willing to devote so much time to anything psychic related.
After a couple of times, I told him, here's the deal. I said, I don't mind coming out to some of these places, but if you find something with a psychic, as soon as you find something or able to say, hey, I think she might be here or something, you just quit, stay there, call me immediately. There was a couple more times I did get a call, but of course it wasn't anything, so they knew after that they better have something a little more serious.
Ron mentioned the digging, which became part of the family's efforts to find Dolores. The diggers were mostly the same group of cousins who had harassed Carl. Tony Rocha calls them the, quote, foot soldiers of the case. They began going out to search the fields, ditches, and creeks around Woodland, hoping to find something. The searches started in a ditch near the Wulff home.
Started digging in that ditch, and that's kind of how we started the dig, and we just dug and dug and dug and dug.
And they didn't stop.
I'm a big Pittsburgh Steelers fan, right? And I missed the first half of the 1980 Super Bowl against the Rams because I was out digging looking for Dolores. I showed you how big it is to me.
Woodland is a large rural area, but Dolores' family members set out to cover it.
A lot of times, depending on the time of year, I'd go out with somebody after work on the weekends. You had to do something. Obviously, there's nothing that we could do to find her. The big world. And they'd say, well, why can't we find her? I said, I'll tell you how hard it is to find her. I said, look at a football field, 100 yards long and 50 or 40 yards wide, something like that. If you said there's a dead body buried out there, and that's it, there's no sign of any digging or anything, you got an idea how long it's going to take before you find that body? Just on a football field. This guy had a whole frickin' world put her in. That's how next to impossible it is.
Here's Janet again.
For 5 years, if anybody wanted to go, they'd call and I'd go with them. And I can remember one time I was digging a hole and there were these mice and I let out a scream. Well, they thought I found her.
The amazing thing is they kept searching without much optimism.
The best way to say it is we hoped like heck we could find her, but we didn't have any reason.
Ron didn't think the digging was going to help much either. But again, because it was important to the family, he showed support and would often come along, especially early on.
I did, because I knew the family was really hurting and they wanted to try to find her, and I knew that they needed to know that somebody was out there trying to help find her, I'd run things by and they'd call me, and I appreciated that. They'd call me about anything they'd heard about a body being found. And sometimes it was far away, but I'd always try to make contact with the law enforcement people to find out about it.
As the investigation continued and the Roaches kept harassing Carl Wulff and searching for Dolores, life went on. And for Paul and Tom, as we mentioned earlier, that meant moving in mostly with Uncle Slick, Aunt Janet, and their two cousins of the same age, David and Matt. For Paul especially, Slick was a blessing, stepping in to become a positive male figure at a time when the circumstances of his life could have easily taken him down a dark path.
Wow. I mean, he treated me way better than my father ever did, and it's not even close.
Who was Matthew Slick Rocha? As we found out through our reporting, he was the single most interesting person connected to this story. A father, a brother, an uncle, and a protector. He had carved a place in American history, and he was someone fully capable of doing whatever he wanted to Carl Wulff.
He's kind of like Popeye. He's got those arms.
You got two choices, Wulff. You can tell me or the police tomorrow where she's at, or I can blow your head off.
He was obviously the glue for not only his own family, but our family and so many other people, and just an unbelievable human in every which way.
That's next time on The Unforgotten, Finding Dolores Wulff. The Unforgotten is a free-range production. Season 3, Finding Dolores Wulff, is written and hosted by Kyle Bonagura and me, Adam Rittenberg. The story is edited and produced by Wes Ferguson, the executive producer at Free Range. Audio editing by Aislinn Gaddis. Audio production and sound design by Austin Sisler with Eastside Studios in Austin, Texas. Special thanks to ESPN.